Welcome to issue 135 of the Captain's Log. In this space, I carry out a reflection most weeks, thinking about an aspect of the social age, some of the writing I've been doing this week, and putting it into a broader context. Well, this year is actually quite a reflective year in practice for me because I'm carrying out this critical reappraisal of my published output across the 17 books and 2,000 odd articles. I'm going back and I'm looking at the evolution of those ideas. So it's something of a look back and a reassessment. And I'll be shifting some of those books. Some are moving to new editions. Some will be new works entirely, and some are being archived. And that's kind of as it should be. A published book represents what I used to think, not necessarily what I think right now. In fact, the overall output from this work will be the first edition of the Social Age Handbook. So I'm looking to really draw together this broad perspective on the context of the social age with its radical connectivity and its emergent democratized social collaborative technologies, this rebalancing of power, the rise of communities, bringing together a volume which looks at that in total. So I'll have the Social Leadership Handbook, the Socially Dynamic Organization book, and the Social Age handbook, looking at it from those different angles: organizational design, leadership, and the broader context piece itself. Then underneath it, a layer of the guidebooks, things like the Social Learning Guidebook, the Community Builder Guidebook, the Trust Guidebook, which are a bit more, they're the sort of strongly research-led, quite practical, applied works. I'll share more of that later, but it's just on my mind as I carry out this reappraisal of my own work. So I started last week by writing a reflective piece about the Singapore Diary. It was one of the early books I wrote, a series of them actually. That one looks at learning, knowledge, and meaning. I wrote one in Amsterdam, later one in New York. They were a combination of travel log, new ideas, a sort of tentative exploration of frameworks. And it's interesting. I noticed some of the language I use, some of the what I would at the time have called the insights from that work, have kind of persisted pretty much unchanged. But other parts I've left behind or I've evolved and moved on from. So it was interesting revisiting that work. As ever, when I look back at anything I wrote more than maybe 3 or 4 years ago, it feels quite clunky. Sometimes it feels like somebody else wrote it. But on the whole, actually, I'm okay with it. I'm archiving it, but I'm kind of saying it's okay to stand as part of that body of work. It really considers how we create the meaning out of what we consume. And that's an idea I've been sticking with very recently in the learning science work, the notion of the creation of meaning. Although today I look at it at both an individual and collective level. So the chapter I shared recently for the Learning Science Guidebook looks at the social co-creation of meaning. So the idea has stayed, but it has evolved. So that's been a good focus last week. This week I'll try to do another of the books. I'm going to try and just work through them, maybe one a week or every other week as part of that reflective practice. I also last week was thinking about voices. So I guess I was thinking about my own voice in the first piece, but I was working with a group about how we find a voice and how our voice is taken from us. And I enjoyed that. I think it's useful in the context of social leadership to consider that, the voices that we're given within the system, the voices we find or claim, but crucially, how a shadow is cast upon people or how silence is cast upon people and how they are left without a voice. One of the themes of our age at the moment is that there may be a radical enablement of certain people, but there's also a disenfranchisement. People can be spread out across a broader continuum, and it's worth sort of considering that our responsibility within the system for everybody or just for a select few. It's why in the social leadership work I would use language about reaching out and reaching beyond, reaching into the darkness, reaching into the silence. It's a constant kind of calibration and recalibration of self. So that's been my work this last week. This week is going to be interesting. I'm embarking on some new postgraduate work, so that's the focus. The critical reappraisal of my own work feeds into that. So I say it's a year in reflective practice. In fact, probably 18 months in reflective practice for me. But that sort of suits where I feel I am. I've got this sort of body of work, and I'm trying now to focus on where it goes from here, looking at the broader social age, looking at learning, looking at leadership. The learning science work is ticking along nicely. I'll be looking at social metacognition this week, hoping to publish a final piece on that. we're doing pretty well, keeping our weekly cafes going. In that, with my co-writers, with Say and Jeff, we're finding a nice tempo and a pace with that work. So there we are. It's a short captain's log for this last week. I hope you have a great week. See you again soon.